Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. And as you could guess by the thumbnail, we're going to switch it up a little bit. I like to do these every now and again. Instead of being a wrestling topic, we're going to cover the 10 best Star Wars movies in my opinion. And I am going to break a little bit of what I normally do on my top 10s. First off, it's not going to be a top 10. It's going to be a top 11. And the reason for that is we're going to rank the 11 live-action Star Wars movies. I'm not counting in the Ewok movies or the Clone Wars cartoon movie. This is just the 11 live-action movies that they consider canon. So with that being said, since there's only 11, we're going to do a top 11. And then we're also not going to have a best of the rest because there's only 11. With all that being said, let's jump right in. Number 10, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. The interesting thing about this movie is I know people that consider this their favorite Star Wars movie, and I could see why. This to me has probably the best cinematography of all the Star Wars movies. The story being told is different and interesting. It was a new twist on the old Star Wars tropes. However, for me, if I look at the sequel trilogy, 7, 8, and 9, this is where that trilogy takes a hit in my opinion, because 7 has a very much feel, and we'll talk about it more when we talk about it on this list, of being in line with episode 4, and 9 feels like, because of 8 being such a deviation from 7, 9 feels like it had to make up 2 movies in one, which again, we'll talk about those movies when we get there. This movie to me gets derailed by the subplot, the bank heist or casino heist subplot that they have here. I think there's some beautiful shots here. I think there's some great cinematography. The face-off with Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker is amazing. It looks great. The fact that they tried to do something different here was cool as well. And this isn't a movie I hate. I like this movie, but we're talking about Star Wars. I'm a uber Star Wars fan. As you can see, I got the hat. You probably can't see it because it's a very faded Star Wars shirt. It was the first Star Wars shirt I found in my closet, so I was like, I'm going to wear it anyway. I have a Darth Vader tattoo on my arm. I'm in a room looking at probably 50 to 60 different Star Wars Funko Pops. I have a box of Star Wars toys from the 80s just over there in the corner that I really need to display and put out there, including the Millennium Falcon, which is my favorite Star Wars toy that I own. I also have the original Chewbacca toy from like 1978, which is one of the bigger 12-inch. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so even with this being ranked 11, it's my least favorite Star Wars movie, but it's still a movie I enjoy, if that makes sense to you. I'll go from that on number 10, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And kind of like Last Jedi, this suffers a bit from being the middle movie in a trilogy that's really more of a setup for the third movie. Again, there are some great storylines here. The plot on Geonosis, the fight with Boba Fett and Obi-Wan. There's a lot of stuff I enjoy here. I just kind of feel like this was a filler movie. It didn't really move the storyline as much as I would have liked. My preference for the prequels would have been to see what happens at the end of Episode 3, the turn from Anakin to Darth Vader, happening at the end of Episode 2, and then us starting to see the fallout from that in Episode 3. Alas, that's not the choice they went with. I still like the movie again, it's just lower on my list. I'll go from that on number 9, Solo, A Star Wars Story. And I know a lot of people that consider this their least favorite Star Wars movie, and a lot of people that flat out don't like it. There are some things here that I rather enjoy. I absolutely love Donald Glover's version of Lando Calrissian. I think he does a great role here. I like Emily Clarke as Kira. I like Woody Harrelson as Beckett. Where this lacks, in my opinion, is Alden Ehrenreich, and I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, and his portrayal of Han Solo. And I don't want to heap this all on him. This is one of those things where it's such an iconic role that I don't think that any actor could have done this justice. I don't think that Brad Pitt could have played the role. I don't think that Leonardo DiCaprio could have played the role. Or if you want to talk about somebody more contemporary, I don't think that Timothée Chalamet could have played played this role. We're so used to Han Solo and the Harrison Ford way of playing Han Solo that to me, that was the one weak spot in the movie. And again, I don't think he did a bad job. I just don't think he can live up to the expectations of the original, which is the reason why I think this movie falls a little bit down the list for me. I do like the story. I do like the backstory. I do like that they tried to bring back Darth Maul at the end. I thought it was a good movie. Again, it's just in there with a lot of movies I like better. Now going from that, our number 8. Episode 9, Rise of the Skywalker. Much like Solo before this, I know a lot of people that consider this the worst Star Wars movie of all time. And I do think there are some bad things about this movie. There's some plot points I don't like. Bringing Palpatine back, to me, spits in the face of what you did with the original trilogy. The whole arc of that was Darth Vader finding his way back to being Anakin Skywalker and turning back to the light side and killing the Emperor. But now you bring him back, thus taking away all of that story arc, or diminishing that story arc, in my opinion. That's my biggest gripe with this movie. That, and it feels like this should have been stretched out over a 2-movie period. It feels like they had 2 movies worth of stories and they condensed them down into one, instead of going, hey, let's go to an episode 10. Let's not just make this a trilogy. We don't have to keep going with that order. We could have made an episode 10 here. And that's where I think this lacks a bit, because some of the stories feel a little bit rushed. Some of it feels like we're just basically coming in and doing what we probably wanted to see in episode 8, which I mentioned previously, which was a stark contrast against episode 7. It feels like this movie tried to do what they wanted to do in episode 8 and episode 9 in just episode 9. What I did like about Last Jedi is they took Rey out of the Skywalker story. And that felt like a better beat, because it felt like she was more a new, nuanced character, not someone that had to have the backstory to be part of this. Again, I'm saying a lot of negatives about this. I did like the movie. I did enjoy it. There are some things I didn't like, but overall, I thought it was good. It was great seeing Billy D. Williams again. I liked the movie. It just, on the list of all of these, it's not as high as some of the rest. Now going from that, our number 7. Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And I went into this movie with a lot of excitement. I liked the original trilogy. The prequel trilogy I enjoyed as well. And I was really happy to see what they could do continuing the story. Where would they go? Would they take some of the legend storylines with Han and Leia's son and bring that in? Would they take the Mara Jade and Luke Skywalker and bring that in? And I enjoyed this. As you can see, it's my favorite of the sequel trilogy. I do feel like there's a lot of this drawing on what A New Hope did before that, and a kind of similar arc between the 2 movies. I like the story of Finn coming from being a stormtrooper to realizing that he was doing wrong. I really like the Poe Dameron character. I think he's awesome. Rey, I think, is an amazing character, and I think they didn't quite do her justice in this trilogy. I do feel like they should have fleshed out more the dynamic with Finn, who obviously at different parts of different movies showed somewhat of a Force abilities. I enjoyed this. I liked Kylo Ren as a bad guy, as being introduced as what was going to be the big bad guy, but not necessarily for the next trilogy. I enjoyed this. It was my favorite of the sequel trilogy. That's why it's here at 7. I'll go from that, our number 6. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I talked about my excitement just a minute ago for The Force Awakens, but go back to when The Phantom Menace was released in movie theaters. It had been 20 years, basically roughly 20 years, since there was a new Star Wars movie. And being someone that watched the original trilogy over and over and over again, I've probably seen all 3 of those movies at least 100 times each. The excitement for The Phantom Menace was real. I was so excited about it at the time. Myself and one of my friends, we were working at a Walmart, and I was young at the time. I mean, this is 20 plus years ago now. I was a cart pusher. I pushed carts from Walmart there. He had worked inside in the pet department. We decided, which we did every now and again, we didn't take that job very seriously. Like I said, I was very young. on our schedule, we went to the mall to stand in lines to make sure we could get tickets to see this movie, which dropped at midnight. It was different back then. You had to actually go to the theater and buy the tickets when the theater opened. So we had to be there and be in line, or we may miss the first showing. I did that while all being on the clock for Walmart. Sorry, Walmart. But that just shows how excited and how ready I was to see this movie. And there's a lot of things I really like. Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan, I love that. Natalie Portman as Padme Amidala, I love that. Ray Park as Darth Maul, I really enjoyed it. I wish he would have had more of a presence in this trilogy. Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon, I wish he would have had more of a presence here. The pod racing scene is still one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Wars. I just love how that's shot and how everything goes down. This to me was a great way to go back and start the Star Wars story, give us from when Anakin was a very young boy and show his turn. I really enjoyed this movie, hence why it's my number 6. I'll go from that, our number 5. My favorite of the prequels, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And when I was talking about 2 earlier, I mentioned that I wanted to see the Darth Vader turn and have a full movie when he was young Vader, but I feel this made up for that. The shots for Order 66 and the shot with the younglings especially is some of the best Star Wars stuff in my opinion. Some of my favorite things, because you know Darth Vader's coming. His duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi, master versus student, I love that scene. His descent into the dark side trying to save Padme, who he had visions of her dying and being corrupted by Darth Sidious, Emperor Palpatine. I love the story they told, and I think Hayden Christensen doesn't get enough credit for what he did here. I rather enjoyed his portrayal, especially in this movie. This movie more so than Attack of the Clones. And I liked how they paced this out and led us into what would be Darth Vader, the Darth Vader that we knew and loved previously to this. This is how he got there. Now going from that, our number 4, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi, to me, was a great movie. Again, that original trilogy, as you'll see here, are some of the best movies I've ever seen. If I'm being 100% honest, though, this is my least favorite of the original trilogy. And I like the story beats on this. I like the fight on Endor. I like the Ewoks. I'm not a hater of the Ewoks. I like the showdown with Luke and Vader and the Emperor at the end of the movie. I feel like it gave us a great finale to a great series. It's just, this is stacked up, again, much like I said with some of the others, against movies that I think are just better movies, in my opinion. I really love Return of the Jedi, again, hence why it's so high on my list. Now going from that, our number 3, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. This movie kind of came out of left field and told us a different story that was happening between the prequels and leading right into A New Hope. This movie tied up a lot of the loose ends and introduced us to a whole new cast of characters that we would go on to love. Jyn Erso, K2SO, Cassian Andor, Saw Gerrera, who we've seen in the Clone Wars previously, Chirrut and Baze, Bodhi, even Orson Krennic. All new characters that really felt like they fit within the Star Wars story. And what I really like about this is basically a war story set in the Star Wars universe. This would be something like A Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan. A very similar type storytelling here. And the finality of it, the fact that it doesn't end as well for our heroes, but we know what they did continued to help the rebellion. And for me, the scene that puts this movie so high, and you're probably all going to guess it, I have a Darth Vader tattoo, so it's pretty obvious, is the end, where for the first time in live action, we get to see Darth Vader like we all imagine Darth Vader to be. He basically goes through and just demolishes a whole crew of rebels, and does it with such ease and such low effort, that this is a Darth Vader I wanted to see. This, when I talk about wanting to see Vader, I wanted to see him like this somewhere in Episode 3. We finally got that in Rogue One, and since then we've got to see him in Obi-Wan, the TV show being this version of Darth Vader, which is awesome. For years we had this version of Vader in comic book stories. But like I said, it was great to finally see it on the big screen. Between the story of this, that's what puts it in the top 3 for me. I absolutely love this movie. I'll go from that on number 2. The one that started it all, Episode 4, A New Hope. If you were to take any movie out of all of these and make it its own standalone movie with no prequels, no sequels, A New Hope is that story. From beginning to end, it tells you a story. It gives you somewhat of closure while leaving it open to make more. We see this ragtag bunch of rebels with Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Chewbacca, R2-D2, C-3PO, going up against this rebellion that's led by Darth Vader and the menacing Death Star. And we get to see Luke Skywalker on his protagonist arc, being a farm boy from nowhere, who's brought into this great story, who eventually becomes the guy that saves the universe. And this is just fantastic. There's a reason why this is looked at so positively, and why this basically set into motion a series of movies, merchandise, TV shows that have raked in billions and billions of dollars over the years. This is just a great story, and even now, 45 plus years later, it holds up. It doesn't feel dated. Now, some of their haircuts do definitely feel like they were from the 70s, don't get me wrong. And some of the animation might not be up to snuff now, but the story itself, it still carries today. It still feels like if you release this movie right now, it would be just as big of a hit as it was back then. I absolutely love this movie. Like all of us, this was our introduction to Star Wars, or for most of us, some of you younger people probably were introduced through the prequels, or maybe even the sequel movies. As we get further and further from when they started coming out, more young people are turning into adults and saying that they were introduced to Star Wars that way, which is awesome. We got basically generations of different Star Wars fans at this time. Love this movie, think it's great. That's why it's my number 2. Now, before I get to my number 1, if you think I put a movie too high, put a movie too low, let me know in the comments. While you're there, smash the like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And with my number 1 Star Wars movie of all time, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. And you probably guessed it if you were following along, it's the only one that's missing from the list so far. I know that's kind of anticlimactic with the way I did this, but even with it being anticlimactic, I think this movie is perfection. Not only is this my favorite Star Wars movie, this is my favorite movie of all time. I'll put this right up there with Goodfellas, with Pulp Fiction, with any of the Tarantino movies. I'll put this up there with The Godfather, Taxi Driver, Scarface, Gladiator, any movie that you consider one of the all-time greats. I will put this right up there with them. This, to me, is what cemented the Star Wars movies as being a major force and not just being a one-and-done movie. Because here we have a different story. Much like the title says, this is the Empire striking back from the events of the original movie, A New Hope. They're back on the offense. They're chasing down Luke Skywalker. They're trying to snuff out the rebels. We get some of the most iconic scenes in Star Wars history here. Luke Skywalker and the Tauntaun, him training with Yoda, meeting Yoda for the first time, Han Solo being frozen in carbonite, and just before that saying probably the best ad-libbed line in the history of movies, when Princess Leia says, "I love you," and he says, "I know." We get introduced to Boba Fett, who's long been a hero and a favorite of Star Wars fans across the world. We see the universe expanding from what we learned in the first movie, A New Hope, to here. And then we get the iconic scene, the Cloud City duel, which, while we're in Cloud City, on a sidetrack, we're introduced to Lando Calrissian, another great character in the story. We get the showdown of Luke Skywalker, who leaves his training early to help his friends to show down with Darth Vader. Although it was a trap, he was lured into this. We get the showdown. Darth Vader overwhelms him. He's toying with him. Then we get the iconic scene, and spoilers, which this whole thing has had spoilers, but we're talking about a movie that came out 40 years ago. I think we're okay with saying the spoilers here, and I'm pretty sure most people know this one. We get the biggest reveal, the biggest swerve in the history of movies where Darth Vader says to Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. Luke says back, and I'm not saying this verbatim, he told me you killed him, to which Vader gives the classic line, I am your father. Luke struggles with this. We see the angst. We see how much this affects him before ultimately jumping down to, I guess, get away from Vader and take his chances and going down a chute that gets him to safety, where his friends in the Millennium Falcon save him. Vader tells him to look inside his heart. He will find it's true. Just one of the awesome moments in the history of movies, and such a different thing to see a movie that was willing to let us have the bad guys going out at the end of the movie on the winning end, seeing the Empire being fully in control and taking back the war, which is so different. Even now, you don't really see movies that do this where there's a movie where the evil is winning. Just in my opinion, the best movie of all time, hence why it definitely had to be number one here. Again, if you think I put a movie too high, too low, let me know in your comments. Let me know what your favorite movie is down here. Put it in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Top 10, no wait, Top 11, and you've been watching Heel Heat.